Hi everyone, my name is Owen Magabinao and welcome to HYVA, which stands for HireYourVirtualAssistant.com. And today I'm excited because I've been out there, trying to research, a series of how entrepreneurs with ideas can, have an idea and basically create an app, right? A mobile app, and a lot of people have been thinking it's complex, and myself included. And I figure, go out there and figure out how can we, with the idea now, go from an idea without programming experience, outsource the entire creation of the app. And today I have Jonathan Stock from jonathanstock.com on the show to talk to us more about that. And go ahead, Jonathan, introduce yourself to the my community.
Hi, I am the author of a couple of books from O'Reilly about building mobile applications with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is a particular approach that allows you to build apps for a variety of different mobile phones without having to deal with an individual code base for each different phone. So you can pretty much write it once and have it work on Android phones and iPhones and etc.
And has this always been the case that people can do what you just suggested, where you create apps in one language, but then automatically it's translated to the different languages that are used by the phone, or is this something new?
I guess everything's kind of new. It's all, but in the
It's new to
scheme,
me.
yeah. In the scheme of things, it's been around since the iPhone was originally announced. So usually when I'm talking to people about this, there's a people tend to generalize, and they generalize and sort of lump all different apps together as if they're all the same thing, and that the same technology is the best technology for all applications. And my feeling is that a lot of applications that you could find in, say, the Apple's iTunes store would have just as easily been built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are plenty of apps, to be sure, that would be very difficult to write that way. So it really depends on the nature of the app, whether or not you would use a native approach or an HTML approach. And
Okay.
yeah, so there's a big advantages to, pros and cons to each one.
Okay. And so I'm curious to find out now. The thing is, you're saying that depending on the type of app you're trying to build, you
Right?
can actually use this, regular programming language like HTML and JavaScript to just go
Hmm.
ahead and build it, and then
Yep.
automatically gets translated to the language that is native to the app. And then there's certain cases that it might not be, where you might probably have to dive in and use the programming language to build it that's specific to that very mobile phone. And just so the audience understands, we're sharing this interview with you, not with the mind that you are going to go ahead and program it yourself, because the whole goal is how to outsource this. But my goal here is to get you to understand as much as possible so that you can share that with the programmer you hired to
Right.
work the process for you. So
Right.
question is, which scenarios will what you're saying not work, and which scenarios will it work for you to go use the native language for the mobile phone specifically?
Right. I think the applications that are a really good fit for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are ones that would have been pretty easy to write as a website or a web page or a widget, those kinds of things. So usually that means things like calculator style apps, or really content heavy apps that have a lot of text and video, and the user is going to interact with that by drilling down through the information to find what they need. It's also a very good approach for large companies, enterprise companies, who maybe want to create an application that's basically an internal application for their employees, and they know what types of phones it's going to deploy to, and they can really tailor the experience. And in some, depending on how you deploy the application, potentially even get around having to deal with Apple at all. Not necessarily have to go through the App Store approval process for all of your updates and everything. But
Definitely.
like I said, it does depend. Certain apps that'd be really hard to do with HTML would be things like, like a immersive game, or something with a lot of animation, a real lot of animation, or something with augmented reality, for example, where you're trying to overlay data feeds and images and that sort of thing on top of a map. That would be really hard. So there are definitely plenty of examples that native code would be the better way to go. But I just think that too many people go native code immediately thinking that that's really the only way to do it. And that's frustrating me because the native approach is much more expensive and much more difficult to learn. It's a much more difficult learning curve. If you want to develop for iPhones, you have to use a Mac. And not everybody has a Mac. Not everybody wants to pay $99 to be in the developer program. So there are a lot of economic hurdles to getting a native app built. And then there are technical hurdles in that if you want to be on more than one phone, you have to now learn how to write Android apps, which is completely different. And then if you want to be on BlackBerry, you have to learn how to, I think there are about 4 different platforms over there now with the new Playbook and the new OS, the Torch OS, I guess BlackBerry 6. So it's just a lot to learn. So if your application is just going to be on iPhone and it's going to be really heavy mapping or something like that, then yeah, go native. But if you need to reach a lot of people on a lot of different types of phones, then you might want to think about HTML.
So that's basically you're saying that with the thing now is like if you have the idea of making apps for iPhone, making apps for Android market, Windows mobile, and all that, instead of trying to get people with the skills to write for those specific application, what you're basically saying is you don't really need that, especially if your app is not going to be that intensive in terms of what it's actually doing. You can use a separate type of tool that will allow you to just convert your language, right? That you create in one certain, and then it changes it so that it can be used on all those different platforms. So what is that kind of tool? What are those tools that allow you to do that?
It's actually, that's one approach to the HTML tools. There are really two approaches that you can take. One is to use something like Titanium Mobile from Appcelerator. And what that does exactly what you're saying, which is that you write JavaScript, actually, and it compiles it. So it converts it it basically reads it and writes Objective-C and Java for Android. Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's like a pre-compiler type of thing that allows you to write in a familiar syntax and then have it compile down to native code, which you then compile down to the real executables. Yeah. And so that's pretty cool. There's some drawbacks to it. For example, the last time I checked, I should check again. Your viewers should check this to be sure, but the last time I checked, they only supported iPhone and Android, which is fine if you only want to be on iPhone and Android, but BlackBerry and Windows Phone, I think, are still not available. So that's one approach, a sort of code generator approach. And then there's a PhoneGap approach, which is really the concept there is that you take a web app, and PhoneGap doesn't convert your code to anything. You actually make it look like an app in a browser, and then you wrap it in PhoneGap, which acts as kind of like an embedded website on the phone. Okay. And so what's cool about that, it doesn't actually convert anything, but it does allow you to talk to things like the camera or the accelerometer or the contacts, I already said camera, all of that stuff. So you can vibrate the phone using JavaScript, which you wouldn't normally be able to do in a web browser.
So is that like you're saying that you're creating the actual app itself on the website, but then PhoneGap itself now, I guess maybe I don't know how to explain that because but it basically translated so that it can use certain functions that each of these different types of phones use. Is it does it work only on iPhone or Android or all of them? It works on a lot of them. I think there's about 7 that are supported right now, and so I guess it's Android, iOS, Windows Mobile, a couple of flavors of BlackBerry, a couple of the Nokia flavors. But people can can check easily if the phones that they care about are supported by going to PhoneGap.com. And there's a roadmap there that's like this big chart with colors all over it that says exactly what features are supported on which platforms. And that'll answer all your questions right there. So if you wanted to,
if you have an app in mind and you know what phones that you want to target, you can go in there and see if, you can use the camera on like a Amigo phone or something. So that would answer those questions.
Any apps come to mind that you think where they use tools like Accelerator or even PhoneGap to create that maybe the users can go check out?
There are lots of them. PhoneGap and Accelerator keep lists
Okay.
of the apps in the stores. PhoneGap even does like an award every month. So you can go to, I think it's phonegap.com/apps. You can go there and there's a long list of applications that you can try out.
Definitely. So yeah, you hear that? You want to go check some tools out that you can use to as a reference to build yours. You can go to sites like that. And the whole idea of this interview is really to educate the listeners on how eventually if they want to outsource the creation of their app. And
Hmm.
let's dive into that. What ideas do
Okay.
you have in regards to how people without programming experience can actually create mobile apps?
Hmm. The first thing that I need from someone when I'm working on an app is really just pictures of what they want it to look like. So even if you don't have any kind of programming skill whatsoever, it's extremely helpful to just even have a pen and paper sketch of how you want the app to sort of look, how you want the pieces to fit together. It doesn't have to be pretty,
Mhm.
just to get a feel for how many screens there are and what sort of features the app is going to have, and that just answers tons of questions if you can start there. The higher fidelity that you can make it, it doesn't have to be pretty, but if it is pretty, then that's even more helpful because it's less work that the designer has to do down the road. So that's the kind of thing. The skill set there is the kind of thing that a lot of straight up graphic designers could help with if your
Yeah.
viewers aren't, if somebody doesn't maybe know how to use Photoshop or something like that. You could certainly have someone do that for you for reasonably, I think reasonably affordable amount of money.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start. Once you have that, then you can show your mock-ups to someone who is actually a programmer just to get a quote, and then you can sort of shop around the idea to see what you're going to end up having built.
And basically, what you explained just now was, taking the idea to maybe a designer who can help you, create kind of sample diagrams that show how
Hmm.
each screen on the app, looks, assuming it's on the iPhone now, how it looks on the iPhone, and then you can take those mock shots of how they look to the programmer who is going to program it. And also in regards to really being able to explain the idea in such a level that the programmer can is it safe to assume that, just based off the mock diagrams, then the programmer will understand what the program needs to do, or is there a different way to communicate that
That's a great way to communicate a lot of information, but there are some things that are difficult to communicate with just a static, either a Photoshop file or even on a notebook. You end up having a lot of sort of screens, and then arrows between this button
yeah.
animates like this to go to this screen, and it does get pretty complicated
Oh
pretty
yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
The mobile design it's a very new concept, and the user experience design is different than developing for the desktop because there are so many differences about the constraints of the device. The resources are just not as much as a desktop computer, and but I think maybe even a bigger deal is that the users who use your app are probably going to be out in public somewhere in a very distracted setting.
Yeah.
They're in all different settings. They're going to want to jump in and jump out really quickly. Most likely, I mean, some
Yeah.
people will sit down and play games on their couch at night, but in general, mobile apps are for when you're on the go and you have short, quick bursts of activity. So you need to really get everything as sort of optimized as possible, because if it's clunky or slow, or the buttons are in the wrong place, or
Yeah.
that's a especially bad one. If somebody taps a button incorrectly and loses work, it's just so annoying. So the design is a huge chunk of the visual design is a huge chunk of the work that you'll have to have done, and then depending on how complicated the app is, the
Yeah.
programming could be simple or complex, or the sketches will pretty much push you in a direction of what the sort of plumbing needs to be done with.
Okay, and but in those cases where the design of the mock-up itself cannot communicate what you needed to do to the
Mm,
programmer, how does the entrepreneur like myself, probably who doesn't have any kind of
right,
programming experience, communicate that
right.
to the programmer?
Well, if it's not not 100% sure I know what you're asking, but I think what you need to know is how does when the developer has a question that isn't answered by the sketch.
Yeah,
So at that point, the developers, it's incumbent on the developer to speak your language. That's part of being a good consultant in my case, or a good developer in general, is that you need to figure out how to, you're the expert of in this case, I'd be the expert of programming. You would be the expert of your business goals.
yeah,
So as long as you can tell me your business goals and I can ask you questions in a way that in a sort of non-threatening, non-technical way, then everything will be fine. But it's basically a back and forth process, and it is the source of issues at times when you get someone who maybe a developer who's super
techie or something.
just so techy, yeah, that they can't remember what it was like to not know what all the terms meant and that kind of thing. It's pretty common for a client to use a word that means something to me that I know they don't mean, because it's got a different meaning for them than it does for me, that kind of thing. So you have to watch out for that sort of thing, and that just takes experience, I think.
But in the case where now it's on the entrepreneur himself to try and figure out, okay, who best to work with,
Right.
how do you then, because you're gonna reach the issues where there's some people, the programmers who are so techy they can't even get out and communicate with you without it
Right.
being techy, and then there's some like you're saying that have that experience to take that initial effort to really try, and when they communicate with the entrepreneur,
Hmm.
communicate in a way that they will understand, but yeah, at the same vein know what the entrepreneur needs. So,
Yep.
but now when we're talking to my audience, they're trying to put together the team of people, right? That will
Hmm.
help them to get the things done.
Right.
What do you suggest that that they should be looking out for in regards to finding the right designer, programmer, and all the different missing pieces that will help them to build that app?
Mm. It's really hard these days because mobile developers are in such high demand that people are either really expensive or they're just not even available. So, not to bang the HTML approach, not to bang that drum too much, but the HTML approach is really good in that there are probably millions of people who have the skills to develop apps with HTML. They already know how to make web apps, and it's just a question of
Yeah,
learning the intricacies of the mobile space, which for them is probably going to be a fun thing to do, and a useful tool to learn, valuable tool to learn. So it's a good way to go when maybe you don't have $1 million to spend, and
yeah.
maybe you can't get Big Nerd Ranch or somebody really well known in the native space to even get on their calendar. So you know it opens up a lot more possibilities
And
if your
that's a
app can
good
be
point
built
you
with
make too,
HTML.
because if these tools you're talking about like Accelerator and PhoneGap can actually help you translate something that was written with web-based language into something that works on a mobile phone,
Right.
then it gets you to the end goal anyways, which is to be on those phones, not necessarily. And also you have to you can also avoid the fact that you have all this demand for the actual mobile programmers that program in this native languages, but
Hmm.
maybe getting access to them might be an issue.
Yeah.
So it opens the doors to you getting your to getting the work done for you a lot quicker.
Yes.
Definitely. And
Yeah, and cheaper.
one thing too is you mentioned something I didn't get to ask was because of the fact that mobile phones are something where the people who are using them are probably doing so many different things, and maybe want to make a phone call. Basically, how does the entrepreneur listen to this? How do they get to the point where they can make their app so easy to use but still gets the point across, knowing that mobile phone is a device that it basically allows the user to do so many things. So
Mm.
you already have that working against you, but in the sense that if it was a maybe a desktop or whatever, you can say, okay, on the web app they're probably going to be having full concentration on it. But if
Hmm.
it's a mobile phone, The
Yeah.
bare nature of it is that they use it for several different things. How can the entrepreneur get the app so easy to use that it still gets the point across and gets the job done? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. The number one answer to that is probably to simplify what you want the app to do. So if there's anything that you can remove, especially when you're building your first one, if there's anything in it that isn't absolutely required for it to achieve your goals, then just take it out. Like, don't put it in. It's surprising how even the simplest applications can really reveal or really turn into complex user interactions and the state of the application, even for something simple like, I don't want to say Twitter. There are a lot of complicated Twitter applications for sure,
Yeah.
but there are some really simple ones too. But even something really simple, like say a to-do list type of application, really simple. You have to decide, well, what happens to the app when the user quits in the middle? What happens to the app when a phone call comes in? Or what happens if, I don't know, the phone crashes or the battery dies or there's no internet connection? So all of these things you need to answer, and those have nothing to do with your app.
Yeah.
So you're going to have plenty of decisions to make without having lots of optional features. So I think it's a really good piece. That's a long answer to your question, but the short answer is simplify the app as much as you possibly can. Just make it really, really simple.
That's a good. I guess make it keep it simple, silly. I guess, and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
the other thing too is in regards to validating what you're doing and making sure that okay, I might think it's simple because I'm coming from my own perspective, it's okay. I have more experience with different kind of apps. Okay, I can figure this out. But
Hmm.
then it might not be the case with regular guy who's just downloaded the app because he needs it. How does
Yep.
one validate that this app really is so simple and intuitive that people can use it?
Yeah. Yeah. I am a big advocate of user testing as early as possible. So when you start to have, even if you have a mock-up, let's say you have a mock-up or usually after the mock-up stage, you'll go to a prototype stage. And the prototype is a little bit more interactive. It probably has some animations between screens. And the data might be static and you might not be able to type it into fields, or maybe you can, but it's not fully functional, but it's starting to have some feel to it
Yeah.
and has some motion to it. I just grab someone in the hallway and say, "Hey, can you take a look at this?" And this is what it's for, and just hand it to them and see where they get stuck. And it will blow your mind because almost every single time they get stuck on something on the very first screen that you don't even look at anymore because it's so obvious to you what that button is for, or that this thing that they're tapping on isn't a button at all. It's just a picture. It's cheap and easy to do ad hoc user testing, and I think it's a really good idea. Save you a lot of money later.
Definitely. And is there a way to, like you just made the example of, grab somebody from the hall and, hey,
Hmm.
test my app. But is there a way to have people test apps that are not, like, kind of local to you? Say, for instance, you want to put it on a website or something and get a
Right.
lot of people to look at it and download. I mean, is there a way to do that?
There are ways to do that on the desktop. I'm not aware of one in the
Okay.
mobile space, but I know that there are companies working on automated mobile testing. I don't know about remote user testing. That would be pretty hard to set up. But there could be an app out there. I wish I knew the answer to that for sure, but I've never heard of one. One of the things you lose with remote testing, even on the desktop, and one of the things you lose with remote testing on the desktop is that you aren't seeing the user in their environment. So you don't know that the dog is jumping up on them, or you don't know that their kids are screaming, or whatever else is going on, or they just spilled their cereal on the keyboard. You don't know any of that. You don't know how cluttered their desktop is. So that to me, that's a fairly large limitation of desktop remote user testing. So you multiply that by 10
The mobile.
with mobile. So
Yeah.
you kind of want to see,
What's going on?
go into a Starbucks and like give it to the, baristas are probably busy, but go into a Starbucks and say, hey, could you check this out in this sort of loud environment or a bright environment, or whatever. I mean, there's just so many situations that people are in when they use their apps that, it's,
I
you
understand
know,
your point. I get the point. And
yeah.
maybe I guess another way to go to find people that you can actually physically hand over the phone and say, hey, play with the app. Maybe Craigslist, go on there and put a post, and maybe people might be interested in meet with you somewhere. And I guess if you're trying to kind of create kind of a scenario of how the environment will be, or whenever they're using your app, then you basically create that simulation and say, okay, go in there and use the app in there and see how it goes.
Yeah, it would make sense to, if your application was for finding your friends at a rave or something like that, you'd want to be in a really loud, dark environment that was packed with people. And I mean, if that's where the app is supposed to be used, that's where you want to try it out. You know what? It just occurred to me while you were saying that it might be a good thing to get involved with local user groups, and you guys could sort of take turns testing each other's apps. Maybe some people are building websites or web apps, and everybody's looking for feedback, different kinds of feedback, but still, that could be pretty helpful, and you might get a little bit more sympathetic ear than the guy standing behind you in the line for coffee.
Definitely. And before we go, I want to ask two questions. First question is in regards to the entrepreneur that wants to starting out, knows that they're going to develop apps on multiple different platforms. What is that one takeaway that you want to give to them as to getting started with making use of tools like PhoneGap and stuff that you suggested?
What's my one piece of advice?
The one advice that you want to leave with them before we go.
Yeah, it would be. I sound like a one-trick pony here, but it would be to try and do it with HTML first. Either if you're going to do it, or if you have a web developer that can do it, try that first. Because even if you don't end up using it, you'll still have a really high-fidelity prototype that you can then pass on to a native developer. So you really have nothing to lose. If you have even the slightest thought that you might be able to pull it off with HTML, you might as well try it.
Definitely. And also for those who, just to in tune with what the whole topic is about, the outsourcing, how people without programming experience can outsource the creation of the app. What is that one thing that you want to leave with that entrepreneur that is about to get started with the process of outsourcing it?
I guess I would say that you want to make sure that if you do outsource it, that you're comfortable with the lines of communication between yourself and the developer. So, it's probable that you won't be in the same location as the developer. So you want to make sure that, there's no language barrier really. There's not a brutal time zone barrier. All that stuff. You want to have a really free-flowing communication, and anything that gets in the way of that turns into potential for confusion, and and that ends up just costing money because somebody thought one thing, you meant something else. And so just make sure you've got really good line of communication with whoever you outsource to.
So basically, that, I guess the takeaway from that is really whoever is going to be part of the team, be it designers, programmers, and whoever that needs to help with the outsourcing, creation of the app, is really spend time to make sure that you really understand what kind of communication channels, or how exactly the communication is going to be, so that that's how it's going to be throughout the entire process. You want to make sure that you like it from the onset, and if that's the case, you can move forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth, so you don't want that to get in anybody's way.
Definitely. And hey, Jonathan, how best can people get a hold of you? Because you've been very helpful in the interview.
Oh, thanks. Probably Twitter. I think I'm on Twitter more than anything. You can go to Twitter/Jonathan Stark, or you can go to jonathanstark.com/contact, and all my contact information is there as well.
Thank you very much for doing the interview. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
So, there we are. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. And before you go, I want you to do me a favor. I'm trying to build my community of entrepreneurs who find my content useful on Facebook, so we can engage, have discussions live right there on Facebook. And to get to my page on Facebook, you go to www.facebook.com/HYVASSISTANT. And again, it's www.com. What am I saying? No, it's www.facebook.com/HYVASSISTANT. And when you get there, what you're going to do is look for a button that says like, and you click on that button, and then basically you become a fan of the page. It's that simple. You don't even have to leave me your email. Just click on the button that says like. And again, the page to go to is www.facebook.com/HYVASSISTANT. And that stands for Hive Assistant. Real easy. I look forward to seeing you on Facebook. Have a great day.